Ready. Good afternoon, everyone. And just saying what a beautiful spring day it is. To get 2 days in a row where it's in 40s in Michigan in early January is a blessing. Nice day, pretty day. Might get a little fluffy stuff tonight, but that'll be pretty too. So welcome everyone today, whether you're here or there or somewhere else in the world. So, beginning this lesson, lesson 20. I mean, I'll talk about this more when we get into the actual lesson. But this was written almost exactly within a few months, 80 years ago. The world in some ways doesn't change at all, but the world that C.S. Lewis lived in 80 years ago is not today's world. And the stuff we're talking about, I read this a lot of times and went over it saying, this is going to take some thinking about teaching. Got a couple quotes to begin with. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is. We never find out the strength of the evil impulse inside us until we try to fight it. And Christ, because he is the only man who never yielded to temptation, is also the only man who knows to the full what temptation means. The only complete realist. That's a quote from C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. And a quote from God, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. That's the words of Jesus from Matthew 6. Let's pray. Lord, you have blessed us. You have blessed us so mightily in so many ways. But there's things that happen, Lord. There are things that happen that just get us to wondering about all sorts of stuff. Lord, lift up our hearts. Help us to be not tempted to be discouraged or wore down or afraid or angry or nervous or anything. But help us in all of our days to put our trust in you. Lord, help us to grow in understanding of your love for us so that we might grow in understanding of our loves for ourselves so that we might truly be able to love our neighbor. In your name, amen. As I said, C.S. Lewis wrote this 80 years ago. And so we're talking about 1939, 1940. This was published about 41, started coming out in a serial form in a newspaper in London. But C.S. Lewis would have been taught by people who were a generation or two generations older than him. So what formed his ideas, and we'll be talking about some of those ideas in this lesson, were people that lived and they were educated in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, quite a bit different than 2021. This is a lesson. I mean, it's a lesson about, we'll get into it. It's about love and marriage and temptation. I mean, I studied this extensively at seminary, but that was 40 years ago. And I was taught by old people, and, people that learned 40 years before that. So views have changed, but has anything actually ever changed? Let me read the opening paragraph. And since we have a few people here today, this might be a letter for discussion. Dear Wormwood, I note with great displeasure the enemy has, for the time being, made a forcible end to your direct attacks on the patient's chastity. You ought to have known that he always does in the end, and you ought to have stopped before you reached that stage. For as things are, your man has now discovered the dangerous truth that these attacks don't last long. Consequently, you cannot use again what is, after all, our best weapon, the belief of ignorant humans that there is no hope of getting rid of us except by yielding. I suppose you've tried persuading him that chastity is unhealthy. The discussion here, and the discussion for this whole letter, is what 80 years ago would have been considered chastity. In our world, it would be that there should only be sexual relations between a man and a woman who are duly married in the eyes of the law, which, if you tell that to most people today, even inside the church, they will laugh at you. But I think they always would have. I don't think it's anything new. I wrote 3 things down here for this first paragraph. The one is temptation. The second is the devil's best tool, ignorance. And the third one is acorns. 2,000 years ago, well, we'll get to that at the end of this, things have not changed, I think, ever. In 1920s, somewhere, the number of people getting married in church who were with child was about 67%. In other words, your grandparents, or some of you, your parents, at least the first time, they were probably with child. And if you go back and check records, which they can go back and check, it was true. That percentage dropped hugely in the 70s. I mean, why do you think it dropped hugely in the 70s? Birth control. People have never changed. People's attitude toward sex never changed. In fact, we're going to read a quote from 1 Corinthians. And if you read from 2,000 years ago, the Bible, it is no different than it is today, or it ever has been. And the temptation that Screwtape is talking to his nephew about here is the temptation to engage in premarital relations. And one thing that I think C.S. Lewis nails correctly is this attitude of ignorance, getting people that, well, you just can't resist. You can't overcome the temptations of the devil. And the third thing I have in a paragraph here is acorns. I think I've told you before, I used to always tell kids and children in confirmation class, the church I was for 20 years before I retired was just surrounded with oak trees. So, I mean, you could be inside the building. It was like raining acorns at times. So it was a handy illustration to have. God didn't make any of us acorns. None of us. Whether we're little children or like really older children. He gave us a brain to think. He gave us the ability to hear his word, the ability to grow in his word, ability to think logically. We're not. So in all this time, since Adam and Eve on, people have not changed. They just haven't. You can go back in history. You can almost pick a time. Obviously, it was during the Roman Empire that the Bible was written. They come up every year. They scrape off some more, dust and rock from, Pompeii. And what's Pompeii all decorated with? I mean, it's like one big porn magazine. I mean, on every wall, on every stand. I mean, that's what the whole place was about. Anything we have today, they were, had back then. in almost any culture at any time. So, 1 Corinthians 10:13. I'll look that up since I got a mic. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation will also provide the way to escape, that you may be able to endure. You know, usually when I use that verse, you know, counseling people or talking to people or in the pulpit or anywhere else, it's, you know, people going through other hardships in life. But it's every temptation. God has not made us ignorant. God wants you to use your brain to think. Ignorance is a tool of the devil. It is not a tool of God. Any questions about that? Because C.S. Lewis in this lesson, if you haven't already read it, becomes more awkward from here. I think what has happened in the situation, because we're talking 30s, 40 England, just like we would have been talking 30s, 40s United States. The world changed with birth control because it was much less of a risk to, engage, in sexual relationships outside of marriage. So what's probably happened here is the person is less tempted to do what, he might be tempted to do. Or, he's gone to church and said you shouldn't do that. So, well, I think you are more tempted right now. But there's been periods, we'll get into them a little bit. There's been periods where it really doesn't make any difference. Very much so. This, when I do one of these lessons, I probably have read it 6, 7, 8, 9 times during the course of a week. I initially read it, I'll probably read lesson 21 again tonight, just because I'm curious. And I'll read it again like on Saturday, and then on Sunday or Monday I'll start going through, the paragraphs and start having ideas on what you can put down. And then as you start going through each paragraph, you read it over and over again, the paragraph. Try to understand it. This lesson, and there are all sorts of study guides. This lesson is skipped on a lot of study guides. C.S. Lewis uses language, and we're going to be talking about it, that is, if any pastor used it today in a pulpit, it would be very offensive to a lot of his congregation. It is, well, we'll get to it, but it's from a point of view that is, not the best point of view. I don't know how to explain it till we get there. Paragraph 2. I haven't yet got a report from you on young women in the neighborhood. Well, that's far enough. Because his point of view is that, the man is in a, I don't want to use the word superior position, but if you understand superior correctly, is being in a primary position, and the female or the girl or the young woman is in a more passive position. And there is a level that I'm kind of uncomfortable with that. And you'll see that even as it goes through. And we're talking about especially premarital counseling as we go through, because it just sort of fits. And it was something that I would certainly counsel especially a younger guy, but even an older guy coming in and getting married. And if he had the attitude that C.S. Lewis has in this letter, I'd counsel him to get rid of it. Otherwise, he's not going to be a happy individual. I haven't yet got a report from you on young woman in the neighborhood. I should like it at once, for if we can't use his sexuality to make him unchaste, we must try to use it for the promotion of a desirable marriage. In the meantime, I would like to give you some hint about the type of woman, I mean the physical type, which he should be encouraged to fall in love with if falling in love is the best we can manage. Falling in love. I hope you see from this paragraph where he's getting that you're really looking from the man's point of view in this whole situation. And, if I was C.S. Lewis pastor in probably 1935 or 1940, I would have been counseling him, because he has a worldview that even then didn't exist. And we'll talk about it. But it reminded me of something. I've officiated at lots of weddings. And I can assure you, as a pastor, the thing I like least is officiating at weddings. I don't mind doing the premarital counseling, all that, but can't stand weddings. Weddings are something to survive. I always tell people, if you can get through your wedding and no one is more mad at one another than they were the day before, you've succeeded. I haven't watched it in like 20 years, but used to watch Judge Judy. She'd have all these cases where people are suing because the flowers were wilted, that the cake didn't taste right, just that's what the whole day is. I mean, the ceremony is just, well, we got to kind of get that out of the way, so we can do this other stuff, and then it's got to the point where you've got to spend sometimes a couple hours with the families, the day, usually the day before. I mean, a Friday would be for rehearsal, the wedding's on Saturday. You'd have families come in on Wednesday or Thursday to arrange where everyone's going to sit. So it is wonderful times. So, that being said, I have said a lot of wedding sermons. Wedding sermons are usually quite a bit shorter because no one wants to hear them. They want to get over it. We want to get on to the vows and get out of here. Normally, when I preach, in fact, I can't ever recall preaching the same sermon twice. Someone might think I have, but I haven't. You change every time. You change. People you're talking to change. But there are illustrations that you use more than once. When a pastor was being installed, I used an illustration there about a gorilla that I'd used before. My wife wanted me to use it. So if you use it again, some of the people heard it, you got to do something. But there was an illustration that I would use, maybe about every 10th wedding, because it would always fit. And it was about this little girl. The little girl just finished watching the movie of Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. She comes in, she's all excited. She goes in the kitchen, tell her mom about Snow White, Seven Dwarfs. Now Prince Charming came and gave her a kiss, and she woke up and was back to life. And so the little girl tells the mommy, she says, guess what happened next? The mommy says, I know, they fell in love. And the little girl says, no, they got married. And the point is, for a lot of people, falling in love and marriage are not the same thing. Yeah. Of course, by now I've taken this couple through premarital counseling, which should take about 8 months to a year. So you know the couple pretty good. Things are going the way they're supposed to. This falling in love, we've already seen it in C.S. Lewis. He's very much of an older point of view, very much more of a worldly point of view. I mean, by worldly, I mean, in this instance, what the world has done virtually from Adam and Eve on until, the mid-1800s, and then only in Western society, is that falling in love comes after you get married. Especially, say, in the United States or in Europe, and people that watch American and European movies, they think that's a crazy notion. Why would I ever marry someone I'm not in love with? But for most of human history, you didn't even see your bride or your husband until your wedding day. Mary and Joseph, they didn't go on dates. They would have had, like in Chinese society, like in certainly all Eastern society, in European society, they might have had, and it might have been when they were little kids, two families get together and say, well, our son's going to marry your daughter, and then that's what's going to happen. I mean, that was common until the mid-18th century. And then, that's the viewpoint of the world, or the Bible. But then in the mid-18th century, the Romantic movement, which C.S. Lewis obviously is not a fan of, I said, no, what happens? You fall in love with someone, and you have an expectation of that person. That person has expectation with you, and a very, very, very different worldview. But certainly something that, we ended last week's lesson about, it doesn't make any difference to the devil what you believe about something one way or the other. It's how he can use it. So here's what he's saying. If this guy can't be tempted to be unchaste, at least get him in a marriage that is not a good marriage. So, does that make sense? I mean, you can check me on all that stuff. That is historical fact. So, and it is a very, very recent trend. And a lot of countries, Asian countries, South Asian countries, in the, probably 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of young people over there were, buying into the Western view, well, I need to fall in love with someone. That's really fallen off. Arranged marriages, matchmakers. You ever watch Funny Girl? That's what that's about, right? In New York, in the early 1900s, you go to a matchmaker, say, get my kid someone that'll fit. So, interesting stuff. Paragraph 3. This is a long paragraph. I tried to break it up, but it wasn't breakable, at least not well. In a rough and ready way, of course, the question is decided for us by the spirits far deeper down in the lower archy than you and I. In other words, all this about love and marriage is decided in the deepest depths of hell. It is the business of these great masters to produce in every age. And like I said, I for a lot of Bible studies on C.S. Lewis or on the Screwtapes, and they skip this letter. I mean, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable teaching it. But this next section shows you that things don't change at all. It is the business of great masters to produce in every age a general misdirection of what may be called sexual taste. This they do by working through the small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type. The aim is to guide each sex away from those members of the other with whom spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages are most likely. Thus we have now for many centuries triumphed over nature to the extent of making certain secondary characteristics of the male, such as the beard. Pastor's here somewhere. There. They're showing by the 1940s, beards were out of stock. I mean, making beards disagreeable to nearly all females. That is great. There is more in that than you might suppose. As regards the male taste, we have varied a good deal. At one time, we have directed it to the statuesque and aristocratic type of beauty, mixing men's vanity with their desires, and encouraged the race to breed chiefly from the most arrogant and prodigal women. At others, we have selected an exaggeratedly feminine type, faint and languishing, so that folly and cowardice and all the general falseness and littleness of mind which go with them shall be at a premium. At present, we are on the opposite tack. The age of jazz has succeeded the age of the waltz, and we now teach men to like women whose bodies are scarcely distinguishable from those of boys, since this is the kind of beauty even more transitory than most. We thus aggravate the female's chronic horror of growing old with many excellent results, and render her less willing and less able to bear children. And that is not all. We have engineered a great increase in the license which society allows to the representation of the apparent nude, not the real nude in art, and its exhibition on the stage or the bathing beach. It is all a fake, of course. The figures in the popular art are falsely drawn. The real women in bathing suits or tights are actually pinched in and propped up to make them appear firmer and more slender and more boyish than nature allows a full-grown woman to be. Yet at the same time, the modern woman is taught to believe that she is being frank and healthy and getting back to nature. As a result, we are more and more directing the desires of men to something which does not exist, making the role of the eye as sexually more and more important, and at the same time making its demands more and more impossible. What follows, you can easily forecast. Other than changing a few of the pronouns, that could have been written this week. Paragraph 3, sexual or cultural taste. When all of us were young, we all liked to think that we were thinking, and that the way we were thinking was because we were thinking, that we were making decisions that I remember back in the mid-'60s in high school. Nope, it was the early '60s. Years go by. And almost every guy wore either a flat top or a Princeton. Princeton haircut, you just had a little bit of hair here in front. All this was shorter, and so you just had this. Flat tops were, I always wanted a flat top, but I never had one as I was told. I once went to the barber and said, I'd like a flat top, and he said, no, your mother doesn't want one. But that's being in a small town, you know. I know what your mother wants. That's what you're getting. And then the Beatles got on, the Ed Sullivan. And the next day in school, all these guys combed their hair down. Just combed it right down. And a bunch of them got kicked out of school for doing it. That act of rebellion. But within a year or two, you know, people were having floppy hair. You know, before I graduated from high school, I had hair down over my shoulders. Like everybody else, you thought you were being like the real me. You were following the trends of the time. So much of the taste that we have is around us. I think I told you I was in Hawaii, and Sue named our oldest son before I even knew it. I mean, the nurse came in and told me what David's name was, and so that's how it happened. So I was going to name Christopher, whether he was a boy or a girl, and I went through all sorts of stuff. I remember sitting down. We're going to pick out a name. I was fairly active in the church then, so I was going to name him Christian. I said, nah, Christopher. I'm going to go with Christopher instead of Christian. It's going to be Christopher Mark, and we really worked on that name. That was the number one boys combination that year. Yeah. A few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, you know, you'd start noticing little girls, they started having grandma names again. You know, Emily's, and Emily's became a very popular name. My grandma's name is Lillian Bertha. Yeah. I had a little girl come in, a baby, and her name was Bertha. I never thought I'd see a child named Bertha again. But, yeah, trends, we're influenced by trendsetters. And they're a hugely more influence in our lives. He talks about, and it hasn't changed, he talks about artists. Artists definitely set trends. The first degree I got was in humanities, and it's not just a coincidence that there's periods of time when, you know, everything in society changes at the same time. Dressmakers. I grew up in small town Michigan. It is just befuddled me even to this day, even though I spent a good part of my life in large cities, including New York, how important fashion is. And, you know, the big influence. Talked to my daughter-in-law and talking about how when she went to high school, she wore a flannel shirt. But all the girls were wearing flannel back then. You know, just same basic style of hair. You know, C.S. Lewis here talking about beards being out of style. Somehow beards came back in style. I am just like, when I see all these people with beards, I'm like, wow, how'd that happen? But people set trends. Actors, actresses, I don't think they're the trendsetters they once were. In fact, I don't think any of these people are the trendsetters they once were. Advertisers, you know, probably, you know. Oh. Well, I don't think any human can match that. But yeah, well, smoking cigarettes. You know, advertisers paid people like John Wayne and a lot of others to smoke cigarettes in movies. A fun thing to do, at least a fun thing for me, is to watch old movies. but old European movies more than old American movies. And the difference, the cultural difference, I mean, not just the smoking, but the drinking. Some of them are hard to watch because how people treat one another. But it's, it is, those things are, and they're in there today. But this is what has really changed are YouTubers and social influencers. I was watching, and this is creepy. You talked about this stuff when back in the 60s or 70s or 80s, it'd be the worst science fiction out there, the worst dystopian world to come. So watching this guy on, and he was explaining, so from one of these big tech companies, on how they be sure that only the truth is getting out to people. And he's showing the big computers that they have that can read everything, including your phone calls, the TV shows that you watch, everything that you buy, and it, is like millions and millions of bits of data. And if they detect something as not being true, and especially in an area, they send this information out to social influencers in that area to dispute it. And this happens within minutes, not within hours, not within days, within minutes. And these social influencers are people on the internet that have, followings, maybe a couple 100,000, maybe a couple million, and they do that. YouTubers, if you have any grandchildren, any grandchildren probably under 20, and maybe even older than that, they will have dozens of YouTubers that they know, and they listen to those YouTubers. And that is a huge, huge, huge influence, a rapid influence, in the world today. It is what it is. The church needs to catch up with it. Society generally needs to catch up with it. It is like the world is operating at the speed of light. A lot of the world's operating that way, and a lot of the world is operating still using telegraphs and Pony Express. The gap is that big, and people don't know it. And you see I put censorship there too. This cancel culture, it's not just influencing people in a positive way, it's also a negative influence. So instead of saying have John Wayne smoking a cigarette, in a movie, you'd also have someone beating up, the person who didn't smoke the cigarette. And that's where we're at. That affects taste, that affects culture. So any question about that? I wrote 2 words here, male and female, because there was a lot more to write. The taste of men is very much influenced by what you see. And there is always been, sometimes it's hard not to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, because you wonder whether you're an old fuddy-duddy really, or you're just like older and wiser. When magazines like Playboy came out, and they were always out. There is no time ever ever when magazines like Playboy weren't out, but they were under the counter. They were somewhere else. But the same thing with the Barbie doll. There was an expectation that, well, you ought to, a woman ought to look like that. And, movies and even TV. I read a paper a long time ago on how much damage Lucille Ball and Donna Reed, I'm trying to think the other one, but these 50s wives did, because people didn't see that before. I grew up small town. Grew up in both Whitehall and Montague. They were small towns. TV didn't even exist there, depending which way the wind blew. You could get one channel sometimes, but any other channel depended on whether the wind was blowing from Green Bay or up from Kalamazoo. So everybody was the same. So you had, two shirts and, two pair of jeans that you wore to school, and you had cuffs in, September that were that high, so you could grow during the year. And, by May, that maybe the cuffs would be that high. Everybody was like that, but no different. I almost said, there's a video out of commercials in the 50s, and how women are treated in those commercials is like gross. It is like incredible. But a mother, a wife that was considered, really doing a good job, and I hope none of this comes off as sexist, but they were like everyone else. And all of a sudden you see Lucille Ball on TV, or Donna Reed on TV. I'm trying to think of the third one. There's three of them together. And, the husband and kids are coming down from breakfast, and they're wearing a string of pearls. They're wearing a string of pearls, and remember, Lucille Ball was a very fashionable person. Their waists are about that big, and they're just perfect. And they clean the house all day with heels on and pearls, and their hair is perfect. And the kids and the husband come home from school and work, and everything is cooked, and they're perfect, and they're happy, and they understand everyone's problem, and they can resolve it. And people coming home and saying, how come you're not like that? What have you been doing all day? And then you go in there and you watch that on TV. Big influence. Big influence. Female, same way. Perfectly content that your husband is just like your husband. A good man. Maybe he's not, as bright as some. Maybe he snores a little bit, but he goes to work every day, comes home, and, we love each other. We fall in love, we do the stuff. And all of a sudden you see these guys on TV. Most of them never work. They all have office jobs. And they have suits, and they're happy, and they're understanding when they come home, and everybody lives in a nice house. I think in the town I lived in, there was not a single house that anybody owned that was as nice as the house on any of those shows. So it's made a difference. And, what Lewis is writing here. He doesn't fully understand what he's writing here, I don't think, because it's in a different period, is that people sometimes are easily they're easily led into temptation, but they see a view that is not real. And it can't be real. I told you a half hour ago that I did not enjoy officiating at weddings. I can't say that 100%. I'm thrilled for dozens and dozens of young couples and their lives ahead and their families and all that. It's the day itself and all the stress. But I'd really like premarital counseling and getting an opportunity to help people see and for them to know that there will be that time. My husband come home and he's just like a dump. I mean, why is he wearing that T-shirt that's still got a hole in it? Doesn't he care what the neighbors think? Oh yeah. I remember in premarital counseling that this is what life's really about. Yeah. So, does that make sense? Because that's one of the main causes of divorce, is an unrealistic expectation of what life is. It's not even being unhappy. So, it's sad. It's so sad. And I've got here, my truth. I would say, and I have no scientific facts to back it up at the moment, but I think I could find them. Although it's hard to find them. It's getting harder and harder and harder and harder to find reliable information because everybody's scared. Social science are scared. If you say a lot of things, you won't have a job. You will not. You will not. Here's something I learned a long time ago. I don't think it's ever changed. If a woman moves in with a man and they are not married, the chances of that person, that woman, suffering abuse is 57 times greater than if she was married. 57 times. But you'll hear constantly, well, everybody ought to live together. And marriage isn't that important. Marriage is that important. And it's not just a commitment. It's not a legal document. It's much more than that. But it's hard to find that. A zillion studies. A child who is raised with their biological mother and biological father does much better than ones who are not. But you can't say that. I mean, professionals can't say that. They'll lose their job. That's why, Jordan Peterson is constantly in so much trouble, because he says it, and people get mad. How can you say that? Because right away you'll have some, well, I was raised by a single mom, and I'm fine. That's true. Single moms do a great job. Single dads do a great job. But the reality is that a child, does best when they're raised by their biological mother and biological father. That's just the way it is. So we have this my truth world, but it's a world that doesn't exist. And, Screwtape and all the ones below him are happy for people to remain ignorant, because it's very hard. Learned a saying a long time ago in counseling: you can heal the truth, you can never heal a lie. So when people are living in a world that doesn't exist, hope you take this the way it's intended. There's only one perfect woman out there, and I married her. So. Now, I mean, the perfect man, the perfect woman doesn't exist. Everybody gets tired. Everybody sins. Everybody gains weight. Everybody loses weight. You know, people's skin dries out when you get old. Your hair turns gray. When you're young, it's not always easy to see. And so if you've married, and that's what I'm talking about at the beginning of this, if you marry an unreal image, or worse, you move in with an unreal image, you're never going to be happy. It's not going to work out. Any questions about that? Paragraph 4. This is the general strategy of the moment. But inside that framework, you will still find it possible to encourage your patient's desires in one of two directions. You will find, if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he is, I'm going to reread this because there are a lot of time when pronouns, and believe it or not, I don't know if all pastors, but when I'm in front of the congregation, there are pronouns that mean nothing, and there are other pronouns that mean something. I mean, if I was a little girl in church and all I ever heard was he, there might be a gap there. So there, it is easy to say he, she, and refer, to both. But there are other times when he's referring to he and she's referring to she. You'll find it. You'll find it if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he is haunted by at least two imaginary women, a terrestrial and infernal Venus, and that his desires differ qualitatively according to its object. There is one type for which his desire is such as to be naturally amenable to the enemy, readily mixed with charity, readily obedient to marriage, colored all through with that golden light of reverence and naturalness which we desire, which we detest. There is another type which he desires brutally and desires to desire brutally, a type best used to draw him away from marriage altogether, but which even within marriage he would tend to treat as a slave, an idol, or an accomplice. His love for the first might involve what the enemy calls evil, but only accidentally. The man would wish that she was not someone else's wife and be sorry that he could not love her lawfully. But in the second type, the felt evil is what he wants. It is that tang in the flavor which he is after. In the face, it is the visible animal idity, or sulkiness, or craft, or cruelty, which he likes. And in the body, something quite different from which he ordinarily calls beauty, something he may even, in a sane hour, describe as ugliness, but which by our art can be made to play on the raw nerve of his private obsession. C.S. Lewis went to too many movies, even in the 40s. Now, you look at movies in the 30s and 40s, and men hit women all the time. I mean, all the time. I know people do, but again, it's much more likely if you're just living with someone versus married. And a lot of people are raised the wrong way, but it's not typical. I'm going to try to rewrite this paragraph. You'll find, if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he or she is haunted by at least two imaginary women or men, a terrestrial and infernal Venus, and that is, her desire differs qualitatively according to its object. I got here two imaginary persons. Neither one very good. The one imaginary person is a person who is, that perfect person. John Stamos must be out of money because I see him on TV all the time. But he's aged well. You don't know who all John Stamos is. I mean, he's a pretty attractive guy. And here even a lot of other shows that people say, oh, John Stamos. Even if someone is physically attractive, that doesn't mean they're emotionally stable. I'm not saying anything bad about John Stamos, by the way. He seems like a very emotionally stable and nice guy. Or that all the qualities you want in a person, not only want, need, are there. So I know this is being recorded on internet. Let me think whether I should say this. I at least want to have the perception that I sometimes think before I say something. There was a couple I once knew. They were members of a place I once was. They're both dead now, but their families aren't. And he was a very ordinary-looking individual. I mean, a very ordinary-looking individual. Nice guy, but a very ordinary-looking individual. He had a job as a custodian at school. Nice. It had a long time. His wife was like really stunning. I mean, like super stunning. And they had 12 kids. And I thought, wow, it's something. And then she died. And she had cancer and she died much older. She wasn't much older than him, but they were older. And all the children were hers. None of them were his. So the one oldest son, who was an elderly man by then, elderly, yeah, you'll laugh, but probably 60, but. And he got up and he wanted to talk at his mom's funeral. And he said the most warm and heartwarming story. And he talked about how when he was a little kid and all his brothers and sisters, one day his daddy left. He just left, never saw him again. And he said, my mom, we had all these little kids. And you're talking, early 50s, 40s, late 50s at the youngest. I mean, there's nothing like we had today. There's no one there to pay your rent. There's nothing. And, he said, I remember telling Mom, I was crying, what are we going to do, Mom? What are we going to do? Just don't worry. God will send somebody. I'll find somebody for a new daddy. That was the guy. And he took care of those 12 kids. I don't know what else they did, because they had this gorgeous house on Lake Michigan that he built himself, every brick of it, every piece of wood. But remember, people used to not want to live on the lake. And he built the house, and they both worked. And I knew all 12 of those kids. Some of them were older than me. And none of them ever had anything to say about how happy their life was, how happy their marriage was, or their mom and dad's marriage was. This was the remarried guy, and about all the fun. I'd been up to where they, had this place on Lake Michigan, and all the things they did, and that was the ideal man. I mean, he was a very ordinary looking person, you know, just working an ordinary job. But that's, you know, the people, you know, God sends us. If you have an imaginary person, you know, this person is just going to be like, so like, you know, I never understood, you know, women's attractions to bad people. You know, but there is. I've known a lot of people close. They're attracted to the bad guy image, you know, and they suffer tremendously, and they stay with it. This thing up here, you know, cultural and sexual taste, you know, we see it and people get involved in it. And you can never, ever, 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 you know, very extremely difficult to ever find any happiness and peace if you're living in a fake world. And that brings me to my most fake thing of all that makes me nauseous. That's the Bachelorette on TV. I cannot understand how people can watch that. And if you do, just pretend you don't, at least when you're around me. I mean, people watch it, and it just gets worse every. But it does damage. Because people think, well, that's what a woman should look like. That's what a man should act like. That's what love should be. You know? I don't know. I don't know what to say. You know, if I was younger and I was going to write a paper, sometimes thought about it, you know, after years of doing it, of why people, a man and a woman, are happy or not happy. Nowadays, we're not even talking about a man and a woman anymore, which again is cultural taste. All the science of the world hasn't found anything any different. People are created male and female. But if you say that, you're in trouble. If you're a medical doctor and you say that to a patient, you're in trouble. You can lose your job. You can lose your livelihood if you say, well, you got to tell me because I've got to treat you and I got to know what I'm treating. I will not. What's wrong with you? And everyone deserves to be happy, by the way. A world that does not exist is always, I got to read the paragraph first. But if I was going to write the paper, the number one reason people are unhappy in a marriage, and usually there's not marriages anymore in their relationship, is unrealistic expectations. Not failed expectations, but unrealistic expectations. They just can't be met. The real use of the infernal Venus is no doubt as a prostitute or mistress. But if your man is a Christian, and if he has been well trained in nonsense about irresistible and all-excusing love, he can often be induced to marry her, and that is very well worth bringing about. You will have failed as regards fornication, solitary vice, but there are other and more indirect methods of using a man's sexuality to his undoing. And by the way, they are not only efficient, but delightful. The unhappiness produced is of the very lasting and exquisite kind. You have an unreal world, you're going to not be happy. It will be very difficult to be happy if you expect something. It's like if you expect your children to get all A's every time, you expect them never to misbehave, you won't be happy. It won't be. I mean, you can have the expectation, but it has to be tempered with reality. The real world, this quotation that we started out with C.S. Lewis, the only complete realist is Jesus. I mean, that is That is quite an insight by Lewis. Jesus is the only one. I mean, I think it's like the 18th is Ash Wednesday. Might be wrong on that. It's right around that time that we began Lent. First lesson of Lent, the temptation. Jesus is the only one who is not given into temptation. But temptation, Lewis says, you don't know how strong it is until you have to resist it, to really resist it. So, I mean, it's not resisting temptation to not eat fish if you don't eat like fish. Any questions about all of that? If you can keep all of that in your head, you can be a help to people. If you can keep a little of it in your head, you can be a help to people. You can be a help to yourself first. I'm going to read from Romans, if I can get to it. One of the most rewarding things to tell people is to remind them that one day you're going to wake up and you're going to look at your husband and he's going to be fat and dumpy. You're going to look at your wife and you're going to think she's ugly. And you'll know it's not true. You're just having a bad day. Because the older you get, the more attractive your spouse becomes. And that is true. That's harder for women to believe than men. So, and that's been written too. That's not my opinion. Men, on the whole, find their wives more attractive as the years go by. It's not that women don't find their husbands more attractive. Women worry more about not finding themselves attractive. They become more insecure. And on the whole, again, I'm not worried about it. If you get to be a 70-year-old man, if you have any woman that will look at you, you're happy. Romans 11. I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means. For I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Do you not know what the scriptures say of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they've killed your prophets. They've demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. What then? Israel failed to obtain what she was seeking. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened, as it is written. God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that would not see and ears that would not hear, down to this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution for them. Let their eyes be darkened so they cannot see, and bend their backs forever. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation comes to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their inclusion mean? Now I am speaking to you, Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the other, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and severity of God, severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. For as you are cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and grafted contrary to nature in a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? So far, the reading. You might say, wow, he's just trying to finish half of a chapter. It's got nothing to do with today. But it's got everything to do with today. Look at the very end. That even those who have fallen away, God can graft back in. God's love is unending. I want you to think of this if it doesn't creep you out. Think of maybe the church you were at as a little child. I can think of the one, it was fairly big. 250, 300 people in worship packed in. Good part of them my relatives. 2 out of 3 of those old men and old women were with child before they got married. And if you check birth certificates, although they're fudged, by the way, people do it. God loves us all. It's not if we live a perfect life. It's the same thing with your children and grandchildren. I better cut this off. I can comment after I say the closing prayer. Lord, thank you. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you through all the temptations of this world that you care about us. Lord, help us not to be ignorant. Help us not to live a lie or try to live in a lie. Help us to see that all people are broken the same we are. That people have their fears and doubts. They get angry. They grow old. They do dumb things when they're young. But Lord, you understand it all. Lord, help us always to put our hope and our trust in you. And help us. Help us to be a light to the people around us. Bless us. Bless this church. Bless our country. Bless all the people. All the people. In your name.